While there are many factors that go into the making of a great story, the primary thing that most people need is the presence of a great plot. However, this is a red herring, as the plot greatly depends on the characters that drive it forward, mainly the protagonist and the antagonist. This is all well and good for a one-shot story, but if somebody is trying to build a legendarium or add to the mythos of the greater world that their story is set in, stopping at just that isn't going to cut it. For instance, while Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones are great stories with some of the most iconic heroes and villains to have ever been written, the reason that people's investment in the series transcends just the primary story is the incredible depth that the authors have gone to create a world that feels lived in. This is what we call lore building. An excellent example of this would be the anime, to which the character we're analyzing today belongs, Claymore by Norihiro Yagi. One of the titans of the dark fantasy subgenre, Claymore is a prime example of a great series that features a world that feels very much alive and lived in, thanks to how the author, Norihiro Yagi, has handled the many characters that pop in and out throughout the course of the story. There is a giant roster of characters in Claymore, both from the current time period of Claire's story and others from a much more far-flung era. Through the interweaving tales of their lives, Claymore stands out amongst many other anime both in and outside of its subgenre for having an extraordinarily fleshed out and almost living, breathing world that sucks the audience right into it. First published in the monthly Shonen Jump magazine in June 2001, it went on to release 154 chapters, which were combined into 27 volumes by the time the series ended in October 2014. A 27-episode anime adaptation would follow under the wings of Studio Madhouse. It would cover the first 11 volumes of the manga with a heavily altered ending. Despite the lackluster and rushed feel of its ending, the anime would be very well received by fans and would further boost the manga's popularity. Claymore hasn't received any anime adaptations since then, which is kind of a shame because if any manga deserves a good anime, and we think you'd agree, it has to be Claymore. The series follows the story of Claire, a warrior belonging to a group that hunts monsters called the Yoma who prey on the humans of the land. Due to their hybrid nature making them part Yoma themselves and the aura of mystique that surrounds them, they're feared and treated as outcasts by the very people whose lives they're bound to save. In this regard, they're very similar to the Witchers from Andrei Sapkowski's novels. Some even consider the Claymores to have been inspired by the Witchers. These Claymores have tragic backstories that have led them down this path where they traverse the interstice between the world of humans and monsters. While they're known to be an all-female group, this was not always the case. Today, we're here to talk about a Claymore who trailblazed a lot of things. Not only was he a male Claymore, but he was also the strongest male warrior, the first #1 ranked warrior in the history of the organization, and the first ever Abyssal being to come into existence. Yes, we're here to talk about the man known as the White Silver King and the Emperor of the North. That's right, we're here to talk about Isley. In this video, we'll journey to the past as we explore all there is to know about the leader of the first generation of Claymores, along with his current state as the Abyssal being of the North. So strap right in as we begin our journey, and keep your heads cool and listen to us if you want to make it back in one piece, for here there are monsters. What is a Claymore? Since we're dealing with a Claymore who's a man, along with the fact that there are some viewers who aren't even familiar with the Claymore universe, this might cause some confusion. Therefore, please allow us to give a brief explanation on the nature of these enigmatic warriors for the benefit of everyone involved. Claymores are created by implanting the flesh and blood of Yomas into the bodies of prepubescent children through a horrible and brutal surgery that many don't survive. Those who do survive are forever changed, and while they retain their human appearance, these children are now hybrids, part Yoma and part human. These changes cannot be reversed, and they begin undergoing grueling and often fatal training while enduring the horrible suffering caused by their transformation. In the end, the survivors are pitted against one another in a final test, but unbeknownst to them, a Yoma is released amongst them. While an ordinary Yoma is generally an easy target for a skilled Claymore, for these mere initiates, its presence almost always proves fatal, causing the test to have a very high mortality rate. From the test carried out during Claire's time, out of the 10 participants, only 2 made it out alive. After the test is passed, these young initiates are given a unique identification emblem and are either held as a reserve or given a number that corresponds to their ability. At a time, there are 47 officially recognized and active Claymores, each responsible for the protection of the district to which they're assigned. They are ranked according to their strength as a warrior, with the #1 ranked warrior being the strongest and the rank 47 warrior the weakest. They are raised and brainwashed to be obedient agents of their creators, who are simply known as the Organization. Even with their pain and trauma combined with their ungodly beauty and strength, these warriors are still presented to us as very flawed, as most humans are bound to be. Isley's origins as a Claymore and Abyssal being explained. The origins of Claymores, particularly Isley, who belong to the first generation of warriors, is steeped in a conflict far from their own shores. At the time, two countries on a continent far away were engaged in a fierce battle. On one side were creatures known as the Asarakam, also known as Dragonkins, who were far physically superior to the humans on the other side. These creatures were capable of achieving even greater power by transforming into large, inhumane monsters who looked just like the Abyssal ones. As the humans of this continent began losing this war, they set up an organization on an island to experiment with the inhabitants to create sustainable hybrids they could control to aid them in the war. This is how the organization and its greatest project, the Claymores, were created. The very first generation of these warriors were all male, unlike the entirely female group that we're familiar with. Even though they possessed the same strength and qualities that the female warriors had, they were quickly phased out and replaced by female candidates. This was because the organization discovered that male warriors were highly unstable and would awaken exceptionally quickly. As the Yoki manipulation is primarily tied to one's ability to control one's emotions, it was said that men couldn't resist awakening, as the process was likened to experiencing an intense orgasm. The number one ranked warrior at this time, as mentioned earlier, was Isley. According to Cronus, the number 4 ranked warrior from this generation, Isley was capable of easily dismantling all 7 members of the Ghosts of the North on his own when he was still a warrior. This is by no means a small claim, as the 7 ghosts are all Claymores who are strong enough to be single-digit warriors themselves, with some having extremely unique skills. He was the undisputed strongest warrior of his generation and would have probably been counted amongst the strongest number 1 ranked warriors in history if the organization hadn't tried to hide their failure and erase all traces of the male warrior's history. As Isley truly considered himself the leader of his fellow warriors, watching them awaken brought him great sorrow. Even as he watched his fellow warriors succumb to their instincts, Isley felt troubled and blamed himself for his failure to fulfill his role as their leader. Isley would eventually awaken, but unlike his compatriots who did so due to them giving into their base instincts, Isley would do so totally of his own volition. Let's make this clear. This man was so powerful that despite being of a flawed generation, he was too overwhelmingly strong and could willfully suppress his awakening, finally triggering the transformation at his own discretion. Isley didn't awaken because he lost control during the heat of the battle, was pushed to his limits, or reached the end of his time as a warrior. He simply chose to awaken because he felt that was the only way. That is some next level badass stuff. This would mean that Isley, the strongest warrior of the generation of men, would finally awaken, bringing an end to his time as one of the greatest warriors of the organization. The world would then feel the wrath of Isley, the first creature to claim the title of an Abyssal being. Exploring Isleys personality as a warrior and an Abyssal being. Ever since his days as a warrior, we're given the sense that Isleys personality is not always what he lets others believe it to be. There is a duality to his personality that he keeps hidden for the most part. During his time as a warrior, he's seen as an easygoing fellow who's unconcerned about holding the number 1 rank, especially in his interactions with Rigardo, the 2nd ranked warrior of the time. Even when Rigardo constantly tries to provoke him for battle, he is seen simply brushing it off, not taking things too seriously. He is shown to hold an outward air of nonchalance even as he sees Rilful appear before him as the first female warrior, even though this indicated that the organization was finally doing away with their male warriors and he and his fellow comrades were being abandoned. We do know from Cronus that all of this was a facade. Isley was indeed deeply concerned about the situation of his fellow warriors as stated earlier. He had a deep sense of responsibility, which was so great that he willingly sacrificed his humanity to put a stop to his comrades' rampage. Unfortunately for this tragic character, the transformation into an awakened being not only changes one physically, but alters the person mentally as well. Although the human consciousness never truly dies, as seen in the case of Priscilla towards the end, it is dominated by their Yoma persona. As an Abyssal being, Isley still retained the leadership status, and many of his former comrades would flock to him to join his army of awakened beings. This was kind of unheard of before, because awakened beings generally didn't operate together as large packs that resembled an army. Sure, we see pairs like Rilful and Dauf, or even Priscilla and Isley, but in general they were extremely territorial. Case in point, the 3 abyssal beings that divided the island into their own separate domains and refused to coexist and share the hunting grounds. It's speculated that just as Priscilla's human subconscious had influenced her actions to lead the former warrior to her demise, Isley's subconscious too had nudged him towards actions that led to his comrade's destruction as he had originally desired. We say this because of the lack of empathy and emotion he showed in how he directed his troops to their destruction, including his right-hand man, Rigardo, who had been with him from the beginning. He sends half his forces, including Rigardo, to face the Claymores in the town of Pieta, where they're all killed, while the other half of his army is slaughtered by Rilful of the West. Isley justifies this by saying that he doesn't like working with groups, but contradicts himself by traveling with Raki and Priscilla for the longest time. Isley is also shown to be highly pragmatic, and every action of his has been weighed and measured looking at a much bigger picture. For instance, when he teaches Raki a new sword technique specifically designed to combat Priscilla, Isley says that he is doing so as he knows the two will cross blades one day. Despite knowing that Raki would never stand a chance against Priscilla, he trained the boy for a specific moment where, after the two fights and Raki is inevitably defeated, the boy would fade from Priscilla's mind, and that would allow Raki to deal a potentially fatal blow on her. Everything Isley predicted since the moment he started teaching the way of the sword to Raki comes to pass in exactly the same way that he had predicted. After toying with Raki in her human form, Priscilla defeats him. She completely erases his presence from her mind, just as a human would towards a bug, and that, as Isley predicted, became her undoing, as Raki thrusted his sword through her throat. This caught Priscilla off guard and provides Claire with the precious few seconds to land her attacks and turn the tide of battle. Another example of his pragmatism and foresight is that upon Rigardo's defeat at the hands of Priscilla, Isley immediately goes to challenge her. After a duel in which he appears to have the upper hand initially, he gets utterly destroyed just moments later. He realizes that the actual depth of Priscilla's nature transcends even the powers of the Abyssal ones and doesn't hesitate to bend his knee. Instead of letting her run amok and cause chaos, Isley takes her in after she regresses into an infantile mode. He does this knowing that a time would come when Priscilla would have to face a day of reckoning. Isley, in fact, uses her presence as an excuse to march south and defeat Lucilia, the abyssal being of the south, and successfully wards off Rilful of the West, who had come to pick up the pieces and ambush him thanks to Priscilla. He also has a strong, nurturing side to him, and despite actually being a creature that is normally dubbed as a voracious eater, he's seen taking care of both Priscilla in her childlike state and Raki, who is a mere human boy. Upon sensing that his presence would put them in danger at some point, he forces them to abandon him. In his dying moments, Isley's final wish is that he had more time to spend with his adopted family of Priscilla and Raki. With a final show of his usual pragmatism, he accepts the fact that despite only needing to kill one more abyss feeder for the infernal creatures to retreat, he has reached his limit and accepts his death. He doesn't beg for mercy or conduct himself in an unsightly manner in his final moments. Isley realizes that his resistance was futile and goes out with his honor still intact. Isley was a true juggernaut of a man. It's speculated that he hadn't fed on humans for a long time despite the uncontrollable urge for human innards that his kind feels. This had significantly weakened him, and despite the weakened state, he was still strong enough to defeat two of the Ghosts of the North, survive the initial attacks from the Abyss Feeders, and defeat Lucilia, another abyssal being. Combining this information with what we said about his willful transformation also proves that his mental fortitude was bar none. He was not only able to resist both the pleasures of awakening, despite being flawed by design, but also the insatiable hunger of an abyssal being of his power. There's a reason why he was referred to as the Emperor of the North, for he truly was a king. What are Isley's motivations throughout the series? Isley is motivated by a number of things over the course of his long life, both as a warrior and an abyssal being. As a warrior, he was motivated to be a leader capable of leading his comrades and proving himself worthy of the #1 rank. After their fall, Isley's motivation changed to redeeming their honor and putting an end to their rampage. Isley looked to shoulder the burden of undoing the wrongs of his fellow warriors and laying them to rest after he felt that he had failed them by not actually being able to prevent them from awakening. There was no one at his level, not even Rigardo or Dauv, and nobody could relate to him as he stood all alone up top, watching as they fell from grace one by one. Despite his vast powers with which he could slay 1,000 Yoma in the blink of an eye, he was powerless to save the people he felt responsible for and the ones who looked up to him. This ultimately shifted his motivation to almost a sense of resignation, as he seemingly wished to atone for his self-perceived failures by embracing their fate and, by doing so, gaining the power necessary to lay his comrades to rest. Even though this motivation would remain within his subconscious, as mentioned in the earlier segment, due to the alteration of his mental state post-awakening, he would gain a new set of reasons to drive him forward. Once awakened, he would for a while be the undisputed and unchallenged strongest creature in the land for a period of time. He was the first awakened being categorized as an Abyssal one, as we mentioned earlier. Isley would become extremely territorial, especially after the rise of Riffle and Lucilia, who made up the other two original Abyssal beings in the skies. This trifecta of overpowered beings would maintain a tenuous peace and lord over their respective domains for a long time. Isley, just like his other fellow Abyssal beings, was constantly on the lookout for a way to take over the other's territory on his own. Unlike the other Abyssal ones, Isley really does feel like a sovereign, with his own territory, general in the form of Rigaldo, and a standing army. The northern frontier was considered to be one of the most dangerous parts of the island by the organization. The fact that the organization sent warriors they disliked or found hard to control there on virtual suicide missions speaks to the perilous nature of that part of the realm. This was all thanks to Isley, who maintained an iron grip over the region and suffered no Claymores trespassing. After meeting Priscilla and being defeated by her, Isley recognizes how powerful she is compared to all three of the Abyssal ones that exist. This seems to have somewhat broken his illusions of dominating the entire land, knowing he would never truly be the most powerful being as long as Priscilla existed. After bending his knee to Priscilla, his new motivation seemed to have shifted towards helping her attain her goal of finding her parents in the south. To this end, his entire focus changes to taking care of Priscilla, even going so far as to break the deadlock between the Abyssal beings by attacking and defeating Lucilia of the South. After he's separated from Raki and Priscilla at some point during their travel, possibly to keep them safe from the Abyss Feeders who were on his trail, we're not truly given a sense of what he wished to accomplish in the end, as he is killed by these fiends. We learn of Isley's final goal during the last battle when Priscilla is battling Raki, and she knows that the Silver King had taught the boy his fighting technique, specifically to counter her. This meant that even though he supported Priscilla in her journey, and while his final thought was about being with his family, consisting of Raki and Priscilla, one of Isley's secret motivations was to see her defeated. Even in death, his presence is felt right to the end of the story. What does Isley look like? Isley is a beautiful looking man with very effeminate facial features. Although not bulky, he is well built with very defined muscles and is strong enough to wield the Claymore as if it were a tiny saber. He has platinum blonde hair and silver eyes like that of a regular Claymore. During his time as a warrior, he's seen wearing uniforms that are very similar to those worn by the women of the upcoming generations after him. His uniform consists of a skin-tight white outfit that he wears both as a top and pants. On his shoulder are triple-layered spalders, and instead of the typical sword carrier that also doubles as protection for the upper back used by the later female warriors, there's a simple hook system to hold the Claymore. He wears a pair of vambraces on his arm along with a simple fold to protect his hip area. His feet are protected by sollerets and sabatons made out of plate. During his warrior days, he carried around his trademark Claymore, which still looks the same as the ones carried by Claire & Co. The key difference between his uniform and the later female uniforms is the fact that his top doesn't have a dicky with his emblem emblazoned on it. In fact, there is no emblem anywhere on his uniform. We mentioned earlier the lack of a sword carrier. One final noticeable difference is that he doesn't have a cloak as part of his uniform. After awakening, his form resembles that of a massive biomechanical centaur. He has glowing ice blue eyes that lack pupils, which further enhances his unearthly appearance. Isley also has wing-like appendages on his back with sword-like protrusions dangling from them, giving it the appearance of a bladed skeletal wing. Perhaps the most significant feature of Isley's awakened form, besides his legs, which can propel him to immense speed, are his arms. He's able to morph these arms into different weapons, with his favorite being a bow, which completes his centaur look. Although terrifying, this form has a certain elegance, especially when compared to some of the other awakened beings that look like true eldritch horrors. What are Isley's attributes and abilities? Isley possesses all the attributes and abilities that Claymores possess, and then some, due to him being an Abyssal one as well. From eternal youth to enhanced durability and speed, he has a plethora of abilities and attributes that we intend to explore fully today. Isley had the greatest potential amongst all the other Abyssal beings, and it's tragic that his powers were not fully fleshed out and explored more. Norihiro Yagi did leave us with enough material to form a general idea of what his attributes and abilities were, though, so let's get right into it and explore them, shall we? Expert Swordsman. The fact that he was the #1 ranked warrior during his time is proof enough that he wasn't just an expert swordsman, but the best of his generation. We catch glimpses of this during his training sessions with Raki while teaching the boy. He has no flashy moves like the Wind Cutter, but instead, he has a very elegant style of fighting that relies heavily on strong fundamentals, strength, and precision. Isley's expertise with the sword is further showcased when he's able to devise an entirely new style just for Raki by adding several elements to the existing Claymore sword technique, specifically for countering Priscilla. Under his tutelage, Raki becomes so strong that we're told no ordinary human can stand up to him in a sword fight. Isley's prowess with the Claymore was so strong that, according to Cronus, the limits of his skills were endless, as he had no one to truly make him go all out against at the time. He was said to be stronger than all of the 7 ghosts of the North, as mentioned earlier, with Cronus claiming Isley could take on all 7 of them simultaneously, and then some purely on his sword skill. He also stated that there was a massive gulf between Isley and the other single-digit warriors, including Rigardo and Dauf, in terms of their skill with the blade. Imminent Yoki. As expected of a rank 1 warrior, Isley's Yoki reserves were off the chart. We don't get to see him in action as a warrior, but from what we hear about him once again from Cronus, the man was an absolute beast. Once awakened, the fact that he transcended even the awakened beings and was categorized in his own league as an Abyssal one is a testament to that fact. He was a powerhouse that was considered to be the strongest Abyssal to ever exist. So powerful that Riffle could only dare to challenge him when she thought he would be weak after his fight with Lucilia. He also defeated Lucilia quite handily in battle, thereby asserting his supremacy once again. All of this is evidence of his immense Yoki, as it is often directly proportional to the strength of the individual, be it a warrior or an awakened being. Finally, it's speculated that the reason Priscilla sought him out in the first place instead of the other 2 Abyssal beings was because she sensed that Isley had the greatest Yoki amongst the 3 of them. Her human subconscious, which was constantly seeking for a means to put an end to her existence as a Yoma, had pushed Priscilla to seek the strongest being in existence to achieve this. All these things prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Isley had one of the greatest Yoki reserves in all of Claymore, and conversely, was the strongest Abyssal being to exist. While there were beings such as the Destroyer, a Riffle-like being, and Priscilla, they were all categorized as beings who had transcended the powers of an Abyssal one. Isley was definitely not as strong as them, but he was surely the best of the rest, which, by Claymore's power hierarchy, is still insanely powerful. Godlike Speed. The fact that his awakened form resembles that of a centaur should give us an idea that Speed was one of his greatest assets. He's considered to be one of the fastest Abyssal beings in existence, possibly on par with Hysteria's awakened form. Rigaldo, his second-in-command, who was also known for his immense speed, as seen when he effortlessly overpowers several Claymores at once, including single-digit warriors, admits that Isley far outclasses his speed. Even though in the manga we're not really given any concrete display of his godlike speed, we can infer what it must be like after watching Rigaldo's own speed. It would have been interesting to witness him fight the other Abyssal beings such as Hysteria, Roxanne, Cassandra, and even Riffle and Dauf using his speed. Immense durability and regeneration. Isley's immense durability and regeneration cannot be denied. As a warrior, even though he's categorized as an offensive type, he would have been able to heal and reattach limbs as we've seen other Claymores do. In his awakened form, he's seen being able to regenerate almost half of his torso after it's destroyed by Priscilla during their battle. Even for an Abyssal being, that's an impressive level of regeneration. Isley also survives the initial onslaughts of the Abyss Feeders, meaning his durability is strong enough to resist the foul creatures despite their relentless nature. His durability and regeneration are eventually overwhelmed as he's already in a weakened state thanks to their previous onslaught. Even then, at half his strength, he's able to fend off these infernal creatures and is only 1 kill away from making them retreat when he finally reaches the end of the road and accepts his fate. Many would not have been able to withstand these Abyss Feeders' attacks even once, as they had been specifically designed by the organization to hunt Abyssal beings. This is the reason we have to give him his flowers when it comes to durability and regeneration, which were some of his strongest assets and are often dismissed because he died being unable to regenerate further, having reached his limits. Weaponized Body Morph. The signature ability of Isley in his awakened state was the ability to morph his arms into several different types of weapons. His preferred weapon of choice seems to have been the bow and arrow. He was capable of firing numerous projectiles at once towards his opponents in rapid succession. These projectiles were created by Isley organically, and he could alter their size as he wished. They were also capable of locking onto their target, which gave them a guaranteed hit chance. We can see him using this against both multiple foes and in single combat. Isley can also transform his arms into a battle axe, lance, short sword, shield, and a massive greatsword just like the one he wielded in his warrior days. He can swap between these weapons on the fly to suit his needs, but for some reason, he doesn't like switching to his broadsword unless he's pushed to. He only transforms his arm into the greatsword during his final battle with the Abyss Feeder, remarking that, at last, he has no choice but to resort to this weapon once again, possibly alluding to his warrior days. It must be noted that he didn't use this weapon against Lucilia, even though she was a formidable foe as well. This could be for a variety of reasons. Our speculation is that he wasn't pushed to the point where he needed to rely on his swordsmanship like he was as a last resort when facing the Abyss Feeders. Regardless, this arsenal of weapons grants him a high degree of versatility in combat, more so than any other abyssal being. Does Isley possess eternal youth and life? Isley, for all intents and purposes, is an immortal in the sense that he won't die of old age or disease. Thanks to his hybrid nature, initially as a warrior and now as an abyssal being, Isley stopped growing old at a particular age. He retains his youthful looks even almost a century after his rebirth as a warrior. Thanks to their inherent regeneration that allows them to easily heal minor wounds, we believe his cell regeneration rapidly replaces his dying cells and doesn't allow their production to decrease. This allows him to retain his youth forever. Having awakened, we believe he would have continued to live forever if he had chosen a quieter life. The only way Isley could have died was through fatal injury, which unfortunately he receives in his battle against the Abyss Feeders. Therefore, he's very much like the elves from Lord of the Rings, where they are essentially immortals but can die in battle. Can Isley reproduce? While the female warriors have had their wombs removed during the experiments conducted by the organization, making them infertile, the situation gets a little more complicated when it comes to the male warriors like Isley. Some argue that even female warriors can reproduce post-awakening as their wounds are now healed completely. Norihiro Yagi, however, doesn't provide us with any insight into how an awakened being can create offspring. The Riffle-like being, even though in possession of both Riffle and Douse features, is not technically their child and is more akin to their fusion, as it wasn't birthed in the natural sense. Male warriors, despite going through the same Yoma embedding surgery, have their reproductive organs intact, which means they could still technically be capable of reproduction. We have no idea if the transformation into an awakened being alters them physically, not just on the outside, but internally as well. This could very well mean that Isley and the other warriors might have lost their reproductive prowess thanks to these changes. In the manga, Isley is shown harboring no desire for a partner or progeny. In fact, most awakened beings don't seem to desire progeny, perhaps because it's such a human concept and is something that probably hardly crosses their mind. Once again, there are outliers like Riffle and Dauf who clearly have affection towards each other and like coexisting together. They are, however, the exception and not the norm. Frankly, the question of whether Isley can reproduce needs to be clarified, but there seems little to no hope that we'll ever get an answer to this question from Norihiro Yagi. Marvelous verdict! What makes Isley such an interesting character is that he is a deeply layered and complex person. His character is extremely tragic despite being one of the strongest beings in the Claymore universe. As a child, he would have endured extreme trauma that led him to the hands of the organization to be experimented upon, along with 99% of the recruits for the organization's warrior initiative. Great indeed must have been the horrors he experienced as a child for his hatred for the Yoma to harbor such immense power. We know this because Day, one of the men of the organization, tells us that a warrior's strength is equivalent to the hatred it possesses for the Yoma. Even though the author doesn't give us explicit details about his childhood, we can infer certain things thanks to a pattern that's laid out before us. After finally obtaining the powers he desired, along with new comrades and purpose, it would all be cruelly snatched away, leaving him alone once more. He would give up his humanity and become the very thing he hated willingly. However, the biggest tragedy of all would be that his death would be so unsightly for such an epic character. Isley, the man known as the strongest abyssal being and one of the strongest warriors to ever exist, after ruling over his northern empire, would die like common prey at the hands of abominable creatures with no souls, individuality, personality or sense of being. He deserved to go out with a bang in glorious combat against a powerful foe or sacrifice himself once again for something he believed in. Instead, he dies hunted like an animal and killed not by the hunter himself, but by the hounds they sent after him. This was a painful, ignominious end to a legendary character. Isley is a fan favorite due to his character design and the way he carries himself throughout the series. Out of the 3 original Abyssal beings, Isley is presented as the most humane, although it is hinted to us that he has a diabolical side to him as well. He is seen as a soft-spoken man with an air of levity around him, which gives him a very disarming personality. This is further enhanced by the duality of his character, which we discussed in the video, as this causes not just the audience, but his companions and enemies to constantly guess what his true goals are. All of this makes Isley one of the most interesting and well-written characters in the series. His presence really enhances Norihiro Yagi's world that he created with Claymore. Maybe the author could do a spin-off series just about Isley. We know quite a few people who would be into that, but what about you? Would you watch a show, even if it's a short one, that shows us the history and life of this character and greatly expands upon it? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Claymore is one of the most underrated works in the dark fantasy subgenre, replete with monsters, medieval settings, and lots of blood and violence. It's definitely not for the faint of heart or squeamish individuals. Behind the brilliant fight sequences, wonderfully crafted world, and well-written characters, Claymore deals with several important themes as well. It deals with profound human themes of loss, sacrifice, betrayal, mental health, and the strength of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. We hope that throughout this video, we've been able to introduce you to one of the most beloved characters in the series and pique your interest in the series as a whole. Time really does fly by when we're in your company, and we love discussing and exploring these animes filled with iconic characters, worlds, and stories with you. We've come to the end of this video for now, but thanks for sticking with us right to the end. We have a whole host of Claymore videos on this channel, and we urge you to check them out if you enjoyed this one. Besides Claymore, we cover everything anime related across the eras and genres on our channel. There's character analyses, lore breakdowns, and theory crafting videos for almost every show, and hope to see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe and stay marvelous.